So in the last video, you saw me take a look at this GMKtec K6, and well, I managed to snag this off of AliExpress for $268, and this was a bare bones unit. So to get into how I have it configured right here, which is 32 gigabytes of RAM, I do have two SSDs in there, but you can just put a 1 terabyte SSD. You can get that for $410 or less, making this pretty much the best value mini PC on the market today. And well, to show you that, we really need to see what the rest of its competition is. So to really understand what I mean by value, we have to jump on over to Amazon here, and we can take a look at the mini PCs that are selling. Right now, I have it just showing all the mini PCs selling from between $330 to $510 US. Right now, it's listing them just in terms of best sellers. So right now, the number one best selling mini PC within this price point is the GMKtec M5 Plus. So very similar body design, pretty much the exact same chassis, but this is rocking a Ryzen 7 8525U. So a Zen 3 mini PC, 32 gigabytes of RAM, but that is DDR4 RAM, and well, a 1 terabyte SSD. For $330, that just does not seem like a great deal if you ask me. The 5825U at this point is just so old for what it is. You know, if we were talking about a $250 price point, I'd say, yeah, there is value here. But the problem is well, that for one, the P3 Lite from Boss Game exists. So that's $360. You get a Ryzen 7 6800H. That's with 24 gigabytes of RAM and a 1 terabyte SSD. At $360, this is not a bad value at all. But again, if we compare it to the GMKtec K6, if you go with the bare bones route for the K6, you're again looking at spending at most $410. Of course, that's not including taxes. And well, you end up with a Ryzen 7 7840HS there. So an entire generation leap for the CPU. That means an upgrade on the GPU. And that's if you get 32 gigabytes of RAM. You can of course also pick up 24 gigabytes of RAM and get that for cheaper. And of course, that is if you get also a 1 terabyte SSD. You can go 512 gigabytes if you also want to save some money there, but I really don't think that you need to cheap out on the storage. So the P3 Lite, in comparison to most of its competition on Amazon, is a pretty great value, but the K6 is just that good of a deal that it makes something like this not that appealing. And you know, I've recently taken a look at the UM760 from Minisforum, and I've really enjoyed this system. I think that the Ryzen 5 7640HS is such an underrated and underutilized CPU. It's so good for what it is, and at $350, it's pretty great, except for the fact that it comes with single channel memory. It's a single 16 gigabyte DIMM. So that means if you want to utilize the full capabilities of its CPU and GPU, more so the GPU, but some CPU tasks are affected. Well, to do that, you have to spend at least another $20 for another stick. Thankfully, since it is just JDEC memory, you can be pretty flexible with what stick you put in there, but that does turn a $350 mini PC into one that's more like $380. And well, at that price point, we are getting dangerously close to the price of the K6, and that is going to be an upgrade overall in terms of the CPU and GPU. There's of course other mini PCs like the GMKtec M7 and the M7 Pro, and right now the M7 non-Pro version goes for $390 on Amazon, though there is a 5% off coupon. That is with 32 gigabytes of RAM and only 512 gigabytes for the SSD. So already falling pretty behind on the specs sheet, but one of its biggest selling points is the fact that it does come with an Oculink port, and that's something that the K6 just does not have. So if you need that expandability, you might be better off looking at systems that do support Oculink. But everything else on Amazon at this price point is just not that competitive. I mean, look at this, $370 for an i7 1195 G7. That is a pretty ancient processor at this point. Again, look at this, $350 for an i5 12458. each. $450. A Ryzen 7 6800H. Okay, so now you have a general idea of what this is going up against. So let's actually just jump in and take a look at the kind of numbers that we get out of this thing in comparison to some of its competition. So some of the systems we're going to be taking a look at is going to be things like the Reatan Alloy 9, my absolute favorite mini PC on the market today, and it will pretty much be representing all the mini PCs that come with the Ryzen 7 Zen 4 CPUs. And of course, we are also going to be taking a look at the Minisforum UM760, and that is rocking the Ryzen 5 7640HS. This at $350 is a pretty great value, but since it's only configured with single channel memory, you are going to need to spend about $20 to get another 16 gigabyte stick and turn this into a 32 gigabyte system. So we'll put it as more of a $370 mini PC. And lastly, we'll put it up against the Reatan Silver 9, which has an Intel i9 12900HK. So let's jump on over to the benchmarks and see how all of these mini PCs compare to each other. But first, this video is brought to you by me. That's right, you can check out the merch store down below. And right now, with what's happening with the tariffs, I'm not really sure what's going to end up happening with the pricing of everything. So for right now, we're going to be doing a sale. So you could get anything in the store for 15% off with code EVO15. And I mean, look, I absolutely love the AI PC Invasion hoodie. It's such a great design. I love that retro sci-fi look. And of course, the Evo robot hoodie is just so good. I love that color of green. It's my absolute favorite. And you can get both of these designs on shirts. It doesn't have to be in the hoodie. I know that it's spring now. But as I said, I don't know what pricing is going to look like by the end of the year. So if you've been thinking about getting anything, check it all out down below. And if you've made it this far, if you're one of the first 10 people, you can get 30% off with code EVO30. So let's get back to the video. So starting off with the games, here is Black Myth Wukong, and you can see it running on the Ryzen 9 7940HS, which is in the Alloy 9. We of course have the Ryzen 7 7840HS that is in the K6, and we have the Ryzen 5 7640HS that is in the UM760, and of course the i9 12900HK that is in the Silver 9. And well, this is a very interesting one because you can see that while the Ryzen 9 does have a lead here, in comparison to the Ryzen 7 7840HS, we're looking at about a 3% difference. At least on the FPS average, 1% lows are at 2.7% and 0.2% lows are at the biggest difference that we see, which is 50%. I don't know if that difference there really makes it worthwhile to spend so much more money. Keep in mind, this is 0.2 percentiles. So these are the worst edge cases, and they are not as indicative of what the performance is going to be like when you're really playing the game. It's certainly not useless information, but considering how close the 1% lows are, this doesn't scare me as much. Of course, the Ryzen 5 gives some pretty impressive results considering that it is essentially giving 92.4% of the performance of the Ryzen 7 in this title. That means that if you can find that Ryzen 5 7640HS on a system that's on sale, you're getting very, very close to the performance of the Ryzen 7 when it comes to gaming. But as it stands right now, with the fact that you need to spend $20 to upgrade the RAM to get this level of performance, it's just not as worthwhile. Though it should be noted that it had better 0.2% lows. And of course, the i9 is just giving a devastating showing here. This is to be expected. This is using far older Intel tech, but this is what is available on the Intel side of things at this price point. Now, if we move on to Counter-Strike 2, you can see that again, the Ryzen 9 7940HS does take a lead, but it's such a minuscule lead. I just don't think it's worthwhile considering the fact that there are some systems with similar chips to the Ryzen 9 7940 HS that will be up to $300 more. That's not worthwhile at all unless there's a very specific use case that you need this thing for. Overall though, I do think it's a great showing from all of the Ryzen chips here. Really, that Ryzen 5 7640 HS keeps impressing me, and I really wish it was available in cheaper systems. But when we're talking about such a small price gap, I just don't really see a reason to go with that instead of just going with the K6. Now, Hitman 3 was one of the most interesting titles to take a look at, mostly because if you are paying attention to the chart, the Ryzen 5 was the best performing on that chart. And yeah, I ran this test multiple times on all of these systems, and it consistently was running better than all of the others at the exact same graphics setting. I don't really know why. I couldn't explain why. There was nothing that I saw that indicated anything different or weird, but it did end up performing better. And you can see that the Ryzen 9 and the Ryzen 7 end up performing pretty much identically. And of course, the i9 is just falling behind tremendously here. But it is funny to think that the Ryzen 5 has a pretty noticeable lead of about 9%. That's kind of insane. And again, this is after multiple tests. I don't really know what's happening there, but it is a consistent thing. I also took a look at Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord, and this was running with the medium in-game graphics settings. The reason I went with medium is because in this title, medium gives you a pretty major bump in graphics in comparison to low or very low. It effectively is what makes the game look like a brand new title instead of just looking like a slightly more HD warband. And while all the other graphical settings after medium don't really matter all that much if you ask me, I think most people would realistically struggle to identify any differences. But at the medium graphics settings, all of these perform pretty well except for the i9. Interestingly enough, the Ryzen 7 ends up taking the lead, but it is by the most unimpressive lead ever of just 0.2 on the FPS average. Again though, the Ryzen 5 ends up giving about 85.5% of the performance of the Ryzen 7, so not bad at all, but again, at the price point that we normally find it right now, it just doesn't really make any sense. And it's unfortunate because if it was even $50 lower, it would put it in a far more competitive price category. All right, and the last game that I took a look at was Rainbow Six Siege, and this is of course running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and this is using FSR at the quality preset, and that is FSR 2.0. And you can see here that there is a bit of a gap between the Ryzen 7 and the Ryzen 9, about a 3.6%. Nothing really meaningful, but more what it indicates is it really worthwhile to pay so much more for a Ryzen 9 mini PC if the performance is sometimes going to be worse than a cheaper system? Well, that seems like a very important question to ask yourself. Of course, there are features that a mini PC can have that can push you towards buying it over another. There's certainly a lot of systems that have the newer chips like the 8845HS will end up having things like Oculink ports, and that might be a reason why you go with a certain model over the other. But don't think that because you see Ryzen 9 there's any real major performance. So what you can see from those benchmarks very clearly is the fact that the K6 competes very well within this price category. There's pretty much no Intel system worth considering in this price tier, unless you have a very specific reason to use a certain Intel technology. Usually QuickSync is the selling point, but even then, you usually don't need to go all the way up to this price point to get something good. Usually spending around $100 to to $150 cheaper will still get you a more than adequate system that will let you utilize QuickSync. Now, when we take a look at the Ryzen systems, this competes really well against everything that is, again, within this price category. A lot of it is older Ryzen 6000 series APUs or the equivalent, or it will be Ryzen 7000 series that's actually based off of Zen 4, but it'll usually be with a RAM and storage configuration that's not exactly the most ideal, usually 16 gigabytes. And of course, the usual 512 gigabyte SSD. Now, the UM760 did impress me a lot. It scores so close to all of its competition that I really wish it at least came with dual channel memory. Because if it came with dual channel memory, it would be the strongest competitor here. But because they only put the single 16 gigabyte stick, it makes it a tougher sell because you're gonna have to open it up anyway. And unfortunately for this case, you have to essentially rip the feed off, and the adhesive just never really sticks the same afterwards. And if you're gonna have to open it anyway, and you're gonna have to order new RAM anyway, why not just go with this unit, which is way easier to open up. You don't need to do anything in the bottom. You pretty much just pop the lid here and you're in there, and you just put in your RAM, you put in your SSD. They make it extremely easy to get in there, because this one is a little annoying to get in there. You do have a fan to deal with underneath there, so if you want as hassle-free of a scenario, this is the way to go. It pretty much destroys everything that Intel has. It is just the most economical option in terms of everything within this price category. All of its other Zen 4 siblings will perform pretty much the same. As you saw, sometimes even the Ryzen 9 was falling behind. And it makes sense if we look at spec sheets. These are all the exact same chip. So save yourself some money. Just DIY the whole thing here. It's so easy to do, and you can save yourself hundreds of dollars. This right now is the best value system. I was really loving the UM760, and I still really love it, but I just wish it was even $30 cheaper would make it a more compelling option. But the fact that you have to upgrade that memory yourself really makes it a tough sell. But check out the GMKtec K6 down below. I'll catch you guys in the next one.